I am very happy to be here at DevConf in Poland. I love this country and I love the amazing cinema rooms. In Belgium we have also conferences in the cinema. I wasn't selected yet, but as a developer and as a speaker, of course, as a speaker, it's such a dream to present your slide deck on cinema screen. So DevConf make this dream come true. And welcome to the talk, Designing Accessible Apps. And apps, how you can create apps, for a talk about how you create apps for people with disabilities. So, let's go. Here you see the overview of what we are going to discuss today. And showing an overview of the context is also a start of a form of accessibility. Some people, by example, people with autism, including, but also people that don't have autism, but other distraction issues, can follow better talks if they know the structure of the talk. And so you can ask, but we are developers, thus we don't have disabilities. You have a lot of developers with autism. I'm such one. I am a developer with autism. And there are more and more developers with autism. And it's also always easy if you see the structure of the talk. So I'm Denny, and I'm a Microsoft MVP since August this year. You can't believe how happy that I am with this recognition. I am the president and the lead developer of DDSoft, my own nonprofit. DDSoft is founded to help people with disabilities via software and apps. I'm a conference speaker and spoke at a lot of conferences in the last 2 years. And I'm sure that the number of talks at conferences I give will only grow. I really want to make a priority of public speaking. So I started my career as a volunteer developer in Ithaca. Ithaca is a coaching center for people with learning disabilities in Ostend. And 7 years later, I'm still volunteering there. And last year in December, I thought, next year is 7 years. Last year in December, this year 19 is 7 years. I thought 7 years volunteering, something special, something magic should happen. And I invented the hashtag 7yearmagic, just like my hashtag dreaming is believing. And the mention of the hashtag was make my dream come true, go to the States, go to the Microsoft headquarters. And I've been there in August after doing a talk in Minnesota. I love it. And in the summer, I achieved my first MVP award, and you cannot believe how happy that I feel with this recognition. The first time I really have the idea I achieved something. I do a lot of talks, and I also talk about how people, for me, a paid job is not possible. I do a lot of talks why I'm a volunteer. It's not the scope of this talk. But since that I received my MVP award, it was the first time that I said to myself, Denny, you achieved something big. And I am really happy. So if I talk about people with disabilities, it's always important that you talk about people. Most in the past, but still there are people, but most in the past, people with disabilities were treated as special species, something special, something unhuman. And some people thought that if you cannot do everything like people can do everything without disabilities, then you are less important. And this is called ableism. But from ableism, we move to inclusion, and you want to include everyone, regardless of their ability or disability. And in the past, also people with disabilities were separated into clinics and specialized institutions, and they cannot take part of the normal life. And lucky enough, in between 2000 and 2010, there was a movement called inclusion. And inclusion means that people with disabilities are included in normal life as for people without disabilities. They can participate the same activities and live in the same district, apartments, doing the same work. And what's also important is that they participate and not only live next to the people with disabilities, also difference. And inclusion, of course, also exists to other groups of people, like people with migration background, women in tech. It's also part of inclusion. But if I talk as me, as Denny, I talk on inclusion in combination with people with disabilities most of the time. And there are a lot of disabilities. You have physical disabilities. This means that the body has difficulties to do what the body needs to do. An example is people who are paralyzed. You have people with vision loss, or you have people who are completely blind, or people who are colorblind. People with auditory difficulties, they have difficulties with hearing. You have people with autism. I say these are the special ones because there are some like me. And the last part of disabilities that we're going to talk to today is about people with cognitive disabilities. They have difficulties with intellectual functioning. And my specialization at DSoft is software for people with cognitive disabilities and autism. So let's go deeper in both of them. Cognitive disabilities are also called intellectual disabilities or learning disabilities. They have significant limitation in both intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior. Intellectual functioning is also called intelligence. And most of the time, if they talk about people with learning disabilities, cognitive disabilities, they talk about an IQ score between 70 and 75. But they have also difficulties with adaptive behavior. And adaptive behavior, you can split it into conceptual skills, social skills, and practical skills. Conceptual skills are, by example, language and literacy, and concepts like money, time, and numbers. Social skills are interpersonal skills, social responsibility, self-esteem, worthiness, and more. And the last part is practical skills. These are activities in daily living. Examples are personal care, healthcare, and travel and transportation. And autism is a mismatch between executive functioning, central coherence, and context blindness. People with autism, in fact, can have, they have difficulties in all these fields. And these fields have to come back in each situation of life to get the diagnosed autism in Belgium, I think. And because we are at a technology conference, more specific a programmers conference, and I love it, we start focusing on digital difficulties that people with disabilities can have. This is going to be the first focus of the talk. But it's not the only thing we are going to cover in this talk. In later slides, by the end of the talk, I'm going to talk about some situation in offline life, just normal life, and I believe how they can adjust it and help it with digital solutions. But I want to add one thing before I want to go deeper into detail of digital difficulties per disability. I want to point that every disability has a spectrum. A spectrum between a little disability 4, etc., until having a big difficulty or disability 4, etc. Just a few simple examples. You can have people with low vision. Not everyone with low vision is completely blind. There are people that see more than other people. And you have people who are colorblindness, that's also in degrees. And if you talk about people with intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, the IQ scope differs within 70-75, below 70. And even in the IQ score, there can be differentiated into the adaptive skills and the subtopics. So people with cognitive disabilities. Just to remind you, other words you may heard about of this group of people are intellectual disabilities or learning disabilities. They have difficulties with understanding. By example, written text. But even spoken text can be a difficulty. These people have also difficulties to understand what to do with an application. Which controls do you have to press? What is the navigation theme of your application? Math is also a difficulty. And also the structure of the screen of the window can be a problem. I know people that the grid is confusing and they prefer controls stacked under each other. No, you just have to, maybe you can ask the question, should I build an application, an app, a software application for people who can't read? And I say yes. I say you really can build apps to help them. You can use techniques I see in later slides in this talk, and there are other talks on the internet from me and also from other speakers. And I really believe that this is an undiscovered topic, a user base that you may not thought about, but that you can help via modern technology. And people with autism can have difficulties in seeing structure. Which buttons do I have to press for which desired situation? People with autism can also have difficulties with concentration, and external incentives can distract them. The same goes for people with ADHD or ADD. ADHD or ADD is not included in this talk, but if you make your application accessible for people with autism, it's automatically adjusted for people with ADHD and ADD. And do you know the difference between ADHD and ADD? They have a difficulty with concentration, and people with ADHD are very hyperactive, but people with ADD, without the H, have the same difficulties with concentration, but are not hyperactive. And colorblind people have big troubles with your application if the application has a non-matching color scheme. And this talk later on, you are going to see color schemes specific for people with cognitive disabilities. Why? Because in Belgium, I work with people with cognitive disabilities, and at this time, I don't have a user base who have together a cognitive disability and are colorblind. And I find a very good approach for people with cognitive disabilities, but at this time not compelling for people they have the same also colorblindness. But I believe as a developer, you fix problems when they arrive. If I get used by a user base who have both, I work on something new. And I'm already searching for this. But this asks experimenting, trying, and making. And it's easy to understand that people with low vision have difficulties to see. They have difficulties to see what's on a screen. Some people are completely blind, but a lot of people with low vision can use your application with big fonts, and nearly all the people with low vision and blind people are professionals in zooming tools on the PC. Now we're going to talk about people with hearing difficulties. And maybe you think people with hearing difficulties don't have problems with apps, with applications. Honestly, years ago I thought the same. But what to do with application with an introduction video? And let's assume that you make an application just for people targeting your native language, not going international. So you make an application in your native language. And you make a really nice introduction video. You don't subtitle it because the application is just to sell within your own country. Okay, but now with the introduction movie showing important things of your application, your app is becoming inaccessible for people with hearing difficulties. These are things you have to think about. Some people, for example, people who with a paralyzed hand or arm, can have difficulties to hold a smartphone and work and use the smartphone both together. Or they can have difficulties with multi-touch experiences and multi-touch devices. Also something to think about in the field of accessibility. A consequence of some people with disabilities is that they live on a fee from the government. And I don't know here, but in Belgium, the government isn't so generous. So the fee is not that big. So if you build an application, a good accessible application, but you are selling the application way too expensive, this really becomes inaccessible for some people with disabilities. And most of the time, the more accessible they need to be, the more disability they have and the less income they have. So things to consider. Also, a difficulty if you talk about money constraints on people with disabilities, then that you have, I'm going back to the slide, then you have a lot of people, by example, Android or iPhone, not iPhone of course, but it's more expensive than Android, but you have a lot of Android users with disabilities who have a deprecated OS or a deprecated device because they can't update anymore because it's old, but they have difficulties, financial difficulties, to buy a newer version, a newer upgrade. So if you want to target people by Android app, by example, accessible apps, you have to think to build for deprecated OSs. Now, I talked about some difficulties, I talked about some disabilities and some consequences. Now I'm going to share you the basics of accessible apps. How you can make software systems to build for people with disabilities in mind. So you can simplify the layout of your application. In fact, accessible layout starts with a simplified layout. And simplifying the layout is making the screen easy to understand. This can be done with less content per screen. Big busy screens with a lot of divided parts of content aren't easy for everyone. Another adjustment to make an accessible layout is using a bigger font. Of course, a bigger font is helpful for people with vision loss, but also if you have an intellectual or cognitive disability, I use the words together, then you can recognize the more how bigger the font, the more the characters are separated from each other, the more they can do their best to recognize some easy words. For many people with disabilities, it's easy to have enough contrast. Use a dark text on a white background. Specific, I found that dark text on a white background is easier for people with intellectual disabilities. But if you start making accessible and inclusive apps, you can make the option to switch also to dark, because despite the fact it's more accessible for people with an intellectual disability, I knew people with autism who are saying, I like the opposite. I like a dark background with bright fonts because they bring less incentive to my head. I know people with autism who have a headache, this physical pain in their head, if they receive too many incentive to their eyes. So that's something to consider. The next talk is another important thing is accent colors. If you want to point on important accents of categories. And the next slides are going to talking about structure, direction, and colors. These three concepts are also part of a simplified and an accessible layout, but they cover enough to take in a full slide in this talk. And the structure is very important. Big application with a lot of toolboxes nested in each other and different windows are for people with an intellectual disability very difficult. Sometimes even really impossible. And even for some people with autism, this can cause difficulties. Some people with autism can spend way too much time to find where a specific option is, or where to click to get things done. If you make an application, the navigation structure or menu structure is really important. Which screens or controls are coming in which order? Another important thing is that you cover one topic on a screen. So if you make an application with different topics, it's important to cover one topic per screen, and you have to make one application for one group of topics. Me personally, I don't believe in huge all-in-one app specific built for accessibility for people with disabilities. And there are people with intellectual disabilities having difficulties to see information in a grid, more in specific if they are in important order. If you stack items under each other, in the order of information is easier to understand. Let's give an example. In Belgium, I built an application to show what's on the menu, what's to eat. And I made a grid with 2 columns, 3 rows, 6 things separate dishes. I designed that the first one is for soup, and then my example, you have meat, vegetables, and potatoes, or what to rice or pasta, it doesn't matter. And then you have some place for the dessert. And I went to an organization with our food app, and they are explaining that some people with intellectual disabilities cannot see the order. So they don't see in the grid if soup is first or is dessert going first. So it was really important to stack each under each other. First you get soup, and then you can say meat, vegetables, what for potatoes, and then the dessert. So it's learning. If you build an application and you go to end customers or to organizations where you sell to, accessibility is also a phase of learning. And there's a nice slide for people who are colorblind. But I'm going to use to talk about colors because I have the experience in colors for people with cognitive disabilities and or autism. And I researched on apps and applications for the user base, and I found the following advice. So I admit, if you have the combination with color blindness and people with cognitive disabilities, there has to be some extra workaround. And if you have these problems, I always want to be your guest for a cross-organization or cross-country project. So I introduced color by function. And the vision of color by function is that you categorize controls in your app by function and not only by the control type or how it's most beautiful. For example, you can have buttons that reads aloud some text. This is called text-to-speech, and text-to-speech is covered later in this talk. So to start, if you have text-to-speech buttons, you can make it a yellow button. So then you have controls who navigate to another page. This can be blue buttons. And if you work with the data app, for example, for menus, then you can have controls that navigate into the data set, for example, the menu for yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and they do it in gray buttons. There are also 2 important basic colors, as I said, green and red. And I don't mention again, you know what I want to say about color blindness. But despite that, in combination for people with cognitive disabilities and children with autism, even from some adults with autism, they use this advice, and they really see it as simple colors with green and red. It's like a traffic light. Red means stop, not okay, danger. Green means it's safe, it's okay, and it's available now. So if you made an application and there's a loader, the loader, it's better that you don't press that again and again and again while your device is loading. Make it red. Ready to navigate, make it green. And you can also use colors for time indication. This can be for days in a week, days in a month. Imagine that you have an application with information per day. Per day, you have other content on the screen. If you click on a day, then the specific information will be displayed. So you can use a button type to navigate within the data set. The active day can be green to show the focus. then I suggest you putting the control of the day before in gray color. In fact, not so important anymore. And the same approach can you use for everything in time indication. So, right now we are going to tell you more about specific content of your application. The content of your application is really important. An app is always about content. You can't make an app without meaningful context. Why should you do it? And accessing content is the reason why your end user gets involved in your app. So, lessons into Chinese. For some people, it's easier to digest information, to digest language, written or spoken, if they are emphasized with pictures or pictograms. Some people need to see the picture because of their language difficulties. So, as I ask, does anyone know what this means? Just twice. And you see the picture, and you automatically know what twice is. And to be clear, not everyone has the same difficulties. But for some people with cognitive disabilities or learning difficulties, letters and words means nothing. Just like Chinese tokens or another language for us. For example, I come from Belgium, I speak Dutch. And here I like it if the menu or the directions are translated into English. And if I go on a restaurant and it's not translated into English, I will be very happy if I have some pictures of the menu. For some people, pictures are not always needed, but they are supported with pictograms about the text or instead of the text. Pictograms can also emphasize text that is related to some actions or controls in your apps. So, this slide is added today. The use of pictographs is also good for inclusion of people speaking another language. So, I'm from Belgium, I speak Dutch. My English is pretty well. I hope you can decide this after this talk. I went to the toilet just a few hours ago. And if you walk into the room, it's the first for men's toilet, the first white. And then you come on this door. I didn't look yet, more on the right, where was the symbol of the men's toilet. So I opened the door. And I saw I didn't used to it. It was forbidden. Just put in forbidden pictograph is really simple and make it easier. So I touched already the surface of language, but we are going deeper into the language topic. I believe, and the mission that I will bring is at this conference, is that magic always happens when you combine different possibilities. Here is an example. You can display some text. You can even display an image or a pictogram, and even use text-to-speech if you press on the button. Text-to-speech is coming later, but I want to say it's combining them all. Just display a pictograph of an image, display some language, and then add a function to whittle out the language. Own language. For people with learning disabilities or cognitive disabilities, it's really difficult, and for some, even impossible, to learn a new language. Then, if you want to make an app to help them, it's important that you build it in the local language of the people you want to reach. So, providing a global application, only in English, isn't always a good choice for accessible apps. And then I'm very happy, not so happy of course, that I live in Belgium, and there are 3 languages in the little country. Belgium is a very little country. There are 3 languages, Dutch, French, and German. So if I want to make an accessible app for Belgium, I have the choice, just make it for Flanders, the Dutch-speaking part. Then I just have to use my native language. Or I have to make it from the 3 languages, and I have to need the French knowledge, or the German knowledge. it's not possible for this group of people to just make it in English. And even if you use language, I want to introduce you the term basic language. Even in the original environment, it is really important in accessibility. Basic words. Don't make it more complicated than it has to be. So if I looking at the menus of organizations as I built ATDs of an application for food, I did some research in organizations, how do they provide choose? So how do they display food? So I advise whether to use the word fish, instead of going deeper in it. Is it salmon, is it cod? So happy, then you have complex words also. Enlightened, no, happy is good. Salad, coals, rabbit, salad coals, vegetables, it's easy. As I said, some people at learning difficulties hadn't a good opportunity to learn written text too. For these people, it's more understandable if you put pictures of words in sign language, or if you use videos, use a translator in the movies. Some applications are using short descriptive movies to explain the application and to give a nice introduction. It's always important to use visible text in that introductory movies, even if the movie is in the same language or the people that you want to target. As I said before, it is important for people who are deaf or having hearing difficulties. And I already scratched the surface of this topic a few times, and I believe text-to-speech, or TTS, the acronym, is really important. And TTS is the possibility of read aloud specific text in the application. By example, the text is on a button or on another control. You should read aloud exactly the same text as appeared in the control. What do I mean? You have a button with the menu of today. Dus today we say duck with vegetables and dumplings. You never should put a button on the screen with the menu, with the text with the menu, and then read aloud duck with dumplings and vegetables. You really should use the text, the same text, this duck, vegetables and dumplings on the same button that you want to read aloud the same text. And why is this important? Even people with learning disabilities are still trying to learn, are still recognizing something. And this, the more you present the real work, the real things, and of course if you use basic language, the more you trigger their brain. And really important, one of the first conferences I gave a talk, there was someone from the audience coming to me, but we have a narrator, that's an Android, or voiceover, that's an iOS. Is text-to-speech needed? Yes, because text-to-speech is not the same as narrator. I explain you the difference. So, narrator, how Apple calls it voiceover, sequentially reads the text from left to right and from top to bottom, except in another language like Chinese or Arabic. Then the settings are the reverse direction. So it's how the device is configured. But he reads sequentially everything. And if you have an intellectual disability and you see controls who are hovering and just scrolling through all of them, it's really complicated. It's just inaccessible. But just start an application without any voice, and you press a button, and you heard what's on the button or an image, that's accessible. So that's a really big difference, and this is an important one. So, and the last part of the content part, in this part of my talk, is about limitations. If you have actions that are not meant to be done for the end user, so the people with a disability, but has to be done by the caregiver or by the family, by the parents, then it's really important to hide the controls or pop up a screen asking for a PIN code or a password. A good example is going to the setting parts of the application. So if you build an application and it's not meant to change the settings, and people don't know what they're doing because they cannot read it, and they change the settings by accident, then you're getting a mess. So I'm going to start about environmental adjustments. And I mean triggers from the outside of the application. External triggers. On different occasions, external triggers can influence the use of your application. We are going to talk about triggers from device and from about notification. Device is coming from your OS, hardware, and notification is coming from your OS software. So device. Let's talk about the device external triggers. The following triggers from your device can cause limited functioning of your application. Sometimes they can even cause a complete app crash. And most of the people with disability can understand the system signs of this malfunctioning, but people with disabilities can be difficult. So one of these triggers may pop up and can lead that your end user can't use your app anymore. So some people don't notice the status of their battery. I have some users that can't estimate how long that they can use their smartphone. If the battery is empty, they are unreachable, and this can cause troubles in cases of emergency. You can help the user, so you can, in each programming technology, you can get the status of the battery, and then you can display it in a graph. By example, green, there is a lot of power. Orange is going more difficult, and red, you really should load the device, and you can do this in a time bar, and even you can use with the low text. There's that text-to-speech is saying, attention, please load the device because I only have 20 minutes anymore. And of course, for some people with intellectual disabilities, 20 minutes is also a very abstract term. Another difficult thing for some people is knowing which device they have, which Android or iOS version. And if I say for some people, I'm not just talking about people with disabilities. Of course, I am also. But I went in Belgium to organizations, and I sold the application to the personnel. They are caregivers, coaches. And I don't know if I am allowed to say it, because it's recorded. And I don't know, is it only in Belgium, but some coaches, caregivers, the technical knowledge, let's say, is very limited. So if you make an application in production, and there's a crash, by example, you have to investigate something, asking via a telephone connection, can you say me the exact version of your device, of your Android version? This can be difficult for some people. And you don't want to hang on with your end customer or an in-between person, like in my example, the caregiver, and spending 20 minutes just to discover which type of app is running or which type of OS is running on the device. And if you use an application that needs internet connection, then you must show with a pop-up, a red control box, or even text-to-speech, that is there no internet connection. So you can build an application that reads via internet connection some data, by example from an open data platform, and the app is not working. The app is not working, and the app crashed. But what's the problem? Just Wi-Fi is not toggled on. And some people have a very limited and expensive 4G or even still a 3G connection because of the deprecated type of device. And yes, I know some people that still have an old 3G device. Maybe they have a prepaid card or a subscription with a very limited amount of gigabytes to use. So it can be helpful if your application is communicating, if you are on free internet, for example Wi-Fi, or if you have to worry because you have an expensive connection and you are using lots of data. And notifications can be helpful for some people with disabilities. For some, it can just be more confusing. And it's important to have a good plan whether you should use notifications or not. But for people with autism, ADHD, or deaf people, a notification that's stored, by example, Windows 10, has no notification center, and a notification that it's stored into the notification center is really accessible. You just skip next, and then maybe half an hour later you recognize, okay, there's still some notification that I have to give some attention to. Well, we're going to talk about making sexy applications and make it accessible sexy. And I think you heard about life as about contrast, different meanings, and always trying to find the best of both worlds. Pay your attention to the next slide. Here you see a really accessible application. It's really useful for many people with intellectual disabilities. But is this application delicious and attractive? No. Am I still accessible? Maybe you have to try to find a balance. Here you see a design that I believe for some people is still accessible, but it's less accessible as it was. And in this situation, it's all about balance. If you build an application, you have to think who the end user will be. What do you think are the cognitive functions of the end user? The lower the IQ score, the more contrast is needed. I mean the contrast between the background of your applications and your controls, and the controls between the types of the function of your controllers, as we discussed before. But you have also scenarios where people are thinking, I don't need that accessible application, I'm not that disabled. So if I went to a user base of people with autism, and I went to a school for people with autism, with the normal intellectual functioning. And I was thinking, having the app, the accessible app, always the menu on your device is really helpful. But then people were thinking, oh, I'm not that disabled, I don't need it. Just give me a really nice, attractive app. But if you then build a nice, really attractive app, it's not accessible for people with intellectual disabilities anymore. So, the last part of this talk, I have 6 minutes. I'm going to be rushed to it. But I want to inspire you with ideas for topics of your next accessible apps, because after this talk, I know you all want to try this out and make an accessible app. I'm going to give ideas of apps that really can make a difference in the quality of life of some people. Some people have difficulties estimating what the feeling temperature will be and how this will affect the choice for clothes out of the closet. This can be an issue in the autumn or in the spring. Even for me, as a person with autism and a quite high intellectual functioning, almost every year I catch a cold in the spring or the autumn season. No fun at all. just making the wrong choices. Even in the category of the hygiene, I believe some apps can be helpful. It can be apps with AI, by example, having an app that measures if you shaved well. But it can also be step plans, this roadmaps. For example, which steps do I have to take to brush my teeth? And let's talk about navigation in the browser scene. Navigation on the screens. Not everyone can use Google Maps. I believe there must be invented a good navigation system for people with intellectual disabilities. For blind people or people with vision loss, you have Blind Square, but it must be possible to make it specific accessible for people with intellectual disabilities too, I believe. Can you help with housekeeping? Yes, of course. You can make roadmap applications or even AI system that can check if some parts of the house are cleaned well or well enough. So I just want to scratch the surface of mental health. A lot of people with disabilities have mental issues too. I believe there's a big gap in the market for good accessible applications to improve mental health. This can be apps with or without AI, and this can be apps that help people communication about their mood, mental health diaries, daily moment diaries. It can be on or offline, or even applications that directly communicate to their therapist. So, with the last advice, I end this talk. I hope that I inspired you, and I hope you want to try some of my advice to help people with disabilities. You have seen that it's not just about making an existing application more accessible, but also inventing, engineering brand new application just targeted for this group of people. I have a little bit time for Q&A, and I want to thank you all for coming to this talk. Some questions? Yes?
Do you have some screenshots of the applications, like before and after optimizations?
No, because as I said, I didn't start the DDSoft to make existing applications more accessible. I really wanted to make, because I started with the menu issue, and there was no app for it, and I just want to make a specific application for an offline situation. So, no. Other questions? So, thanks.